Great. Yeah, so my name's Akasamitra, and I'm going to be doing the second half of the class. And what we're doing is we are, as every Monday evening, we have a talk in the second half of the class. And at the moment, we're doing a series on what we call the paramitas. And that gets translated in different ways. So one translation of paramita is going beyond, and they're qualities of what we call the Bodhisattva. So was anybody here for any of the other talks in the series? Doesn't matter if you weren't, but Rowan was. That's good. He's doing the text. And so who else was? Okay, so quite a few of you were, yeah. But a Bodhisattva is a very evolved kind of being who's been practicing the Buddha's teachings for many lifetimes and is intent on becoming a Buddha, basically, is very, very intent on becoming a Buddha, becoming fully enlightened, fully liberated from all the things that keep us from our own potential. And I'll say a bit more about that as the evening goes on. But not just for the sake of themselves, that's the really important bit. They're practicing in a completely altruistic way. So I think often we get a bit hung up on this thing about altruism and why we practice. So for all of us that are unenlightened, the reality is there's going to be mixed motives. But the more we can turn our mind outwards to other beings, actually the effect of that is it starts to liberate us. Because it's our preoccupation with ourselves that actually is like a kind of a sort of a weight on us, really. We get so fixated on kind of, me and my life and my difficulties and all of this sort of stuff. And actually, when we're able to get to a point where we're kind of, to use a modern parlance, kind of sorted out enough to start to look outwards and to think more about serving, that's when that's when the Buddhist teaching really starts to have an effect. So that's a little bit of an introduction about what the paramitas are. They're called the six perfections. So when they're perfected, basically, when the Bodhisattva perfects these qualities, that's when they become enlightened. So that's when they become a Buddha. So we have a Buddha on the shrine, and he's a kind of an artistic, poetic representation of what an enlightened being looks like. So he's golden, he's radiant, he's beautiful. And when those qualities are perfected, that's what it looks like. But we can practice those qualities at our level as well. So they're both kind of fruit and path. They're qualities that emerge as the result of practicing the Buddha's teachings, but they're also a path as well. So as we put them into practice, or at least the early sort of paramitas are, and I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. Because we've already looked at, can anyone say which paramitas we've already looked at? Not Kuslasara, that's cheating.
Shila, Dana.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, so the first two, which was a talk I gave a couple of weeks ago, I nearly said Dealer and Sana. I don't know what that is. Dana and Shila. So can anyone remember what Dana and Shila means?
Dana is generosity.
Yeah.
Shila.
So who said that? Ethics, that's right. So it's ethical practice, yeah. So I'll just write these up because it's worth remembering these. So Dana, which means generosity, and Shila, which means ethical practice. I spent quite a long time talking about this a couple of weeks ago, so if you're interested, you could go back and watch that talk if you've not seen it already.
And Shanti.
And Kshanti, that's right, yeah. So Kshanti, anyone remember what that means?
Energy.
No.
Patience,
that's right, yeah. And energy is? Virya, that's right. So Virya, which is energy, but it's not just any kind of energy. So it's not just the kind of energy that you get from I don't know, drinking a can of Monster or something. It's a particular kind of energy, which is
energy in pursuit of the good.
Energy in pursuit of the good. So you could say it's energy directed into ethical practice, into becoming more generous, becoming more compassionate, all of that sort of thing. And these come in pairs, and dana, I think is kind of a... So dana is included in sila. So generosity is included in ethical practice, obviously, but traditionally, I don't know why I'm sounding like this, a bit funny, I just stand up. It's because I was doing that, but anyway. So it's included in ethical practice, and traditionally dana is where you start. Like anyone can start with being generous. Even if you're not particularly ethical in the rest of your life, you can start with generosity. You can just start by giving. And even if you don't feel like it, and even if you don't, you're not in a good place or anything like that, you can always be generous, basically. That then can lead you into practicing ethics more generally. So, we have the 5 precepts, so we're talking about cultivating contentment, ethical speech, kindly and gracious speech, generosity, how you conduct yourself in the area of relationships with people, and then kshanti and virya are patience. It means much more than patience, actually. Sangadharan gave a very good talk on this last week, but I'm not going to say too much more about that. And virya, which is energy. And all of these they balance each other out in a certain sense. You can see how they become perfected. But things start to change slightly when we get to what we're going to talk about this evening. So this evening what we're going to talk about is, the Sanskrit word is samadhi. And does anybody, some of you were here in the first half, anybody have any idea what that means? Or have you heard of this work before? Say again?
Right concentration.
Yeah, so it's sometimes translated as right concentration. Any other translations or any other...
Meditation.
Yeah, so it's sometimes translated as meditation as well. Anyone else?
Stillness of the mind.
So you could translate it as stillness of the mind, yeah? Go on.
Is it wisdom?
It's not wisdom, actually. No, so wisdom is another paramita, and I'll say a little bit about how that fits into this kind of schema. But just staying with samadhi for now. So meditative concentration, stillness of the mind. It's just translated sometimes as concentration, as meditation. But the problem with that is it doesn't do samadhi justice at all. It really doesn't do it justice. And we have this issue time and time again that these words come down to us, often Sanskrit or Pali words in Buddhism. And it's really important that we don't get stuck on the translation and we actually try and come at it the other way round and think more broadly about what it might actually mean. So I don't know probably a lot of you here speak other languages, like a second language or maybe even a third language or a fourth language. I think it's really interesting learning a second language because what you realize is there are no accurate translations for anything. No translation is completely accurate. Language is always, that's not true actually. I just realized. I suppose when you've got nouns, the word for television means television in another language. But for a lot of words, there aren't actually direct translation. So say, for example, in Pali, a word like dukkha, which gets translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness. Thanks, Pete. It doesn't actually mean that. It's just what we translate it as. And I think it's always worth thinking about that. So it's worth bearing that in mind with all translations, I think, in Buddhism. And samadhi is no different. It really doesn't do it justice. But what samadhi... Well, I'm going to attempt to describe what samadhi means, basically, this evening. It's a sort of a quality that opens the door to it opens the door to wisdom, basically. So it's a quality that sort of pervades one's experience. It arises on the basis of practicing these other paramitas, but it's a kind of a different stage, and it's really, really important, because if there is no samadhi, I think it's almost impossible for us to sort of practice a Buddhist life in any systematic and ongoing way. If we don't experience it, it's very, very difficult for us to practice. And when we do experience it, it opens things up in a way which kind of changes the game, really. So it's a kind of quality of sort of openness, expansiveness, appreciation, connection, and traditionally that's said to open in meditation. So some of you may have experienced in meditation that higher states of consciousness can arise, which we call the dhyanas, and technically that is samadhi. So it is meditative concentration, but it's not only that. That's samadhi in one particular context. But the problem with that definition is it's quite narrow. And what it implies is if you don't experience that in meditation, then you're not experiencing samadhi. And actually, the way it is really, in a sort of more open way of thinking about it, is it's the quality that can open up through meditation, but it can open up in other ways as well. And I'll say a bit more about this as the evening goes on. There are all sorts of things that we can do that enable us to cultivate samadhi and that causes samadhi to arise. And it then infuses your life with this quality. So Sanghadarin was talking about, at the tea break, when he did the announcement, was talking about this experience that he had on retreat, where everything became very, very beautiful. And nothing had actually changed in one way, but his mind had changed. That's the quality of samadhi. And it enables you to see things in a different way. And it arises on the basis of when you practice these paramitas, what it does is it has an effect on you, and it basically causes you to weaken the sort of self-preoccupation that we have. So we're all very self-preoccupied, and we're all basing our lives on certain truths which aren't actually true. So we believe that things have a sense of permanence that they don't have. We believe that there's a separate me here and there's a world out there. I was thinking about this earlier, actually, and I was thinking, like, traditionally, the way that we talk about what we call this truth of anicca is that there's no fixed and separate self. But actually, I think a more helpful way to think, another way of thinking about it is that it's thinking about basically the world in relation to I. So we see the world in relation to me. And that all of this is basically in relation to me. You all see the world in relation to you, but for me, I don't care about that. Obviously I do, because I'm a Buddhist and all of that, but really, actually, that's not really what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with all of you in relation to me. Sometimes when I teach the Metta Bhavana, I talk about this. It's like, really, if we're honest with ourselves, most of the time, the way that we see other people is like, I'm the star of this film that I call my life, and you lot are all like these bit part actors, basically. And some of you are like, I don't know, that, they become friends, they might become, whoever, you know them quite well, and they get more of a lead role in your life. But the person who's just in the shop, well, he's just like a bit part actor, basically, isn't he? And, there's all of these people out there, but somehow it's all about you. Everything's in relation to you. The people that you know, it's like if you don't know them that well, then you just don't really have much regard for them, basically. And everything gets interpreted according to what you think. We have these views that we carry around and we interpret the world in that way. So we have certain things that we believe, and it's like we're imposing our views on the world, and that's not actually how reality is. And the more disjunct there is between what we think and how we approach the world, And the more we try and impose these views that we have on the world, it just causes problems because it's not actually the way things are. So, for example, when a relationship breaks up, we're deeply convinced, maybe not even on a conscious level, maybe on a much deeper level, like, why is it so painful when we break up with someone? It's one of the most painful things that we can go through. I was talking about this with a friend the other week. Like I was saying, it was a very painful relationship breakup that brought me to the Buddhist center when I was in my early 30s. I got involved when I was young and I'd kind of drifted away, and then I came back in my early 30s. And lots of things had happened to me. My father had died, my grandfather had committed suicide, I'd had very difficult things happen to me in my life. Somehow those things affected me, but not as deeply as this breakup. And it's like a wrench. Like, why is that? We know that things are impermanent. We know that most relationships don't last. And yet it's so painful when it happens, or when someone dies, or when someone gets ill. It's because deep down somewhere, it's not because we're bad people, or we're doing anything wrong. It's just the way that we're wired is somehow really back to front. And that wouldn't be a problem, but the problem is that it causes us suffering, basically. And the more we can loosen that and undo that and weaken that, it makes our experience of the world much, much, much easier. And part of the effect of that is our lives become kind of animated with this quality that we call samadhi. When we start to see the way things really are, it's not just a seeing, it's a seeing through. So you actually see through those delusions that I've talked about. And when you see through that, actually what happens is something else arises in its place. So I'm going to try and explain this with the use of the trusty flip chart. And I thought I'd do this a little bit differently this evening, just to mark a recent event. So I'm going to draw something, and you have to see if you can guess what it is. Okay? Okay, so just to say I'm not very good at drawing as well, so forgive me, but that's meant to be round. Okay. Anyone so far?
Burger.
No, it's not burger.
Donut.
You probably won't get it, but okay. Okay. It looks like Zippy from Rainbow at the moment, doesn't it? It's not meant to look like that, but okay. I should have actually drawn this out before the class because I'm making a bit of a hash of this. But anyway, okay. So it's a big round thing. Anyone so far? Any ideas? Who said that? Yay! Rowan got it right. Okay, so it's the Death Star. Okay. Because it was May the 4th on Saturday, wasn't it? So May the 4th, Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. Yeah. So this is the Death Star, right? So this is like the. Go with me on it. So what the Death Star represents is, well, what does it represent? No. Yeah, it kind of represents basically all the dark forces in the universe, doesn't it? All the delusion, all the pain, all the suffering, all of that, okay? So in Buddhism, you have what's called the three poisons, or the three root delusions, yeah? So you have greed, hatred, and delusion. So another way of talking about greed is kind of craving and aversion. So craving for greed and aversion is the same thing, but it's when you don't. So craving is when you want something and you just want, basically you want more of it. So something's pleasurable, so you want it. And you don't just want it, you want to own it. Like this thing that I was talking about before, about seeing everything in terms of I, craving is you want to somehow appropriate that thing into yourself. I think that's what's partly painful about when I was talking about relationship breakup, isn't it? It's like when someone dumps you or when a relationship ends, it's somehow like part of you has been taken away, isn't it? We take it so personally, and we take everything personally. If we like something, we want to appropriate it and we want to somehow make it part of ourselves. We want to sort of add to this sense of identity that we have, and that's what we're doing there. Or we just want sense experience, so we want pleasure, we want, food or sex or whatever it is. It's not just ordinary desire. So you have a desire for food, that's just part of being human, isn't it? You have a desire for people's company and so on. That's not the issue. The issue is when we turn it into a problem because we're trying to fulfill this sort of sense of lack that we have, and it latches on to certain things, like whatever it is. I don't know, rare books or synthesizers in my case, or, like scrolling through Instagram or whatever it is. And then hatred is that kind of ill will that we have towards people, and delusion is what I've been talking about, where we don't actually see the way things are. So all of this coalesces into this Death Star, and you might think, okay, well, greed, delusion really is a problem, and partly why I'm using this as a humorous but also serious metaphor is all of the suffering in the world, all of the difficulty, all the violence, all the wars, all the everything, right through from our own personal difficulties and our falling out with people, or our whatever it is, right through to really awful stuff on a massive scale, is all basically contained within that. So if that was gone, the world would be completely different. Like in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, we talk about pure lands, which is where these Buddha figures are basically, and each Buddha and each Bodhisattva has a pure land, and in the pure land there is none of this, and it's a metaphor for what our lives look like when that is gone. Because what our lives would look like is idyllic, blissful. There would just be more love. There would be an infinite amount of love and compassion and connection, and none of the sort of the difficulty and the grit and the clunk and much, much, much worse than that characterize our lives. So, what do we do about that? Well, this is where we call in the X-Wing fighters, isn't it? So we've got these X-Wing fighters here. So we've got Dana here. We've got Sila here. We've got Kashanti here. And we've got Virya here. And what they do is they come in and they attack the Death Star. And they're kind of assaulting it, and it's getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And as it gets weaker, so I can't do all the graphics and everything, but you can imagine bits of it starting to blow up and the computer systems are going and all of that sort of thing. As all this disappears, it doesn't just leave a blank space. What happens is, as all of that gets weaker, you start to get samadhi. And then, when you have samadhi, that's when you can have prajna. So what that means is there's a quality that comes in when these are sufficiently weakened, and you can just experience that. You can experience that when you're quite new to meditation. Often people will experience this on their first retreat. You practice meditation, the mindfulness of breathing, the metta bhavana, whatever it is, and your mind quietens down to a point where the key thing is there's just less self. So there's less of that, in meditation when you sat there going, I'm rehearsing this argument that I had with a friend, or I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next week, or whatever. When that all quietens down and you can stay with that for long enough, you go through what's called access concentration, and even in access concentration you get a trace of samadhi, and then you go into higher states, and that's when samadhi starts to arise. But even more generally in life, as you practice these more and more, and generosity and ethical living is more just how your life is, and then on the basis of that you get kshanti, which is this kind of this patience, and there's a quality of contentment in that, and virya, which is this energy which comes from a kind of a focused ethical way of living. All of that adds up to a weakening of this, and you get samadhi that just starts to just infuse one's general existence, and it's not just something that arises in meditation. So the result of that is, like I said, it's this quality of openness, expansiveness, appreciation. There's less of a sense of self, and also what that does is it gives you a certain confidence. So have you all heard of, when we talk about Shraddha, you know what that means? So it means a sense of confidence in the Buddha's teaching. So you've been practicing all of this, and you can see that it's having an effect on your life. And that gives you a sense of confidence, which makes you want to carry on practicing, which means that this continues to arise. And it's a kind of a positive spiral, basically. That's my practice Death Star. It's a bit better than that one, isn't it? But anyway. So maybe I'll just pause there for a moment and see... well, actually, I'll just read you. There's a quote from the Buddha in one of his teachings where he talks about... he says, "Samadhi could shatter the Himalayas, the kings of mountains, to say nothing of pitiful delusion. It could shatter the Himalayas, the kings of mountains, to say nothing of pitiful delusion." So it's not just a kind of feeling good. It's a quality which is very, very pleasurable as your life starts to open up, and the way you are in the world starts to become much more connected, much more expansive. But it's much more than that, because it clears the way for prajna, which ultimately... prajna is wisdom. It's that seeing through, and that needs to happen again and again and again and again. But the more it happens, the more you can weaken that, and ultimately it gets what's the word? It gets completely undone, and then a completely new kind of consciousness arises. Okay, so maybe I'll just pause for a moment and see if that's clear, or if you've got any questions or any comments. Or
are there more paramitas, or are they the 6 ones?
They're the 6, yeah. So dana, shila, kshanti, virya, samadhi, and prajna. Yeah. Yes, Jay-Z. Yeah.
Are they sequential?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Jay-Z. So in a way they are sequential, and in another way they're not sequential. So the way that they are sequential is that, as I said, dana is traditionally like a starting point, and then on the basis of practicing dana, you practice sila more generally, and then you practice kshanti and virya, but they're not sequential in the sense that you do one and then you move on. It's like once you start practicing, once the Bodhisattva, once all of us actually, like dana is always there. And for the Bodhisattva, they perfect that quality, but they don't stop being generous. They become more and more generous. And what happens is, it's like if you think of like little wheels or spirals is probably better, is like you start one and it feeds back into itself, and then you start others, and they're all feeding into each other. Do you see what I mean? So they're sequential in the sense of, as I said about dana and sila, and then samadhi arises on the basis of these, and then prajna arises on the basis of samadhi. So that's the important bit with what I'm saying for tonight. Yes.
With prajna, because they talk about wisdom and compassion being the two like wings of the Bodhisattva. But like compassion isn't a paramita.
No.
So where does compassion come into all that structurally?
Well, you've got different maps basically. So I think this is what's important to think about is you have lots of different maps in Buddhism. So you have like, the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, the six paramitas and so on. This is one schema and one way of looking at it. But in terms of what you're talking about, compassion would naturally arise when you see through that delusion, basically. So when you see that you're not a fixed and separate being, when you stop seeing the world in terms of this I and others, then compassion will naturally arise, that sense of connectedness. And when you're able to see also that your suffering is actually universal, that the difficulties that you have and the suffering that you have actually is the same for everybody else, then compassion will naturally arise. And that's an aspect of prajna. Yeah. Go on, you were going to ask something? No?
What is the Death Star? Because I've not seen Star.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I didn't really explain it, did I? So the Death Star is, God, talk about a glaring omission. Yeah. Talk about a glaring omission. So the Death Star is, it's basically like the headquarters for the dark side in Star Wars. So you basically, and I think this is important to go back to actually. So I think why I chose this, and I am slightly just, sort of joking as well, but actually I think it's important because at the center of Star Wars is a struggle between good and evil. And that's a kind of universal myth, it's across lots and lots of different myths, isn't it? But I find it quite helpful actually to think about that. So when I was a kid, I was obsessed with Star Wars. There was this character called Luke Skywalker that had this thing called a lightsaber that was like, this sword that you could kind of, it used to make a great noise and it lit up and stuff like that. And partly I just wanted one of those. But I think I identified with that thing of there's a thing about a kind of noble quest, basically. And what the Death Star is like the center of the dark forces in Star Wars. And there's a battle going on between, in Star Wars you would probably talk about the dark side and the Force. You might talk about good and evil, but in Buddhism we probably wouldn't see it in that way. It's more like the forces that lead towards enlightenment and the forces that lead away from that. And the more we're dwelling in forces that lead away from that, then the more suffering we're creating. And the reason why I find that helpful, joking aside, is that actually it's really important for us to realize that when we're generous, when we are practicing these qualities, when we're being ethical, when we're meditating and so on, it really does have an effect on the world. It's not just about you, basically. I think like mythically, that's a story which is never going to end. And from a bodhisattva's point of view, I think, one could argue that there's a sense in which one knows that those forces are never going to be completely overcome. But in ourselves, if we overcome that has a huge effect on the world. Like I think about, say, for example, in our tradition, so our teacher, Sangharakshita, one of his main teachers was a man called Dada Rinpoche. And Sangharakshita Bhante, he described him as a living bodhisattva. He said that he was, one of the most spiritually advanced beings he'd ever met. He described him as a living bodhisattva. And when somebody has overcome this delusion and those forces to that degree, they can have such a strong effect on the world. It's like they just light up the world. I work for a charity, Karana, and we fund projects in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And for a long time, we funded a school that was founded by Dada Rinpoche. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of refugee children came through that school. And he made that school the primary work in his life. And because of that, I had a bit of a connection with him. And I know people who knew him. And the way they talk about him was he just like, everybody loved him. And being around him just had such a positive effect on everyone. And it's possible for human beings to be like that. And I think that's really something to aspire to. I'm not particularly that bothered about just working on my own negative mental states for my own sake. It's like, that's not going to get you very far. Whereas actually, when you really start to see that by working on ourselves, actually, we not only have an effect on the world, we actually change the world. We really change the world. And I think we tend to underestimate the effect that we have, actually. I think in terms of our ethical life, we vastly underrate the positive impact that we can have, and we tend to underrate the negative impact that we can have as well. And actually, I feel like that's something I can get behind, is really wanting to change myself so that I can have an effect on the world. And I really think it's possible to do that as well. Often people talk about wanting to change the world, wanting to have an effect, all of that sort of thing, but usually what they mean is they want self-glorification. But actually, if you really start to think in terms of, I'm just repeating myself, but yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'd also just like to go back to this thing that that Sangadharan was saying earlier about this effect, about being on retreat. And I'd like to ask you, maybe close your eyes for a moment. What's the most beautiful experience you've ever had in your life? Can you ever think about that for a moment? What was it like? What was the quality of it? Maybe, if that's difficult, you don't have to choose the most beautiful experience. But think about a time when you've experienced tremendous, beauty or connection or meaning or... Okay, now you can open your eyes. And I just wonder if anyone would like to share what they were thinking about. Yeah, go on.
Giving birth.
Right. And what was it about that was so beautiful?
The amazement.
Right.
And it's like it can be scientifically explained, but
right.
when it actually happens, the joy of it
right.
is
yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
It seems impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, when you really think about it, it's quite crazy, isn't it? But yeah, and I wonder if, I'm not a parent myself, but lots of friends who are parents, and part of what they say is there's a sense of their life not being about them anymore. It's not just about you. You've got this being that for the rest of your life you're going to be connected to. Would you say that's right?
You're no longer important.
Right.
You
That's amazing.
And your needs
Yeah.
are not.
Yeah.
So a lot of other stuff starts to feel insignificant.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah. So it's maybe like a sense of perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got a bigger perspective. You said you're suddenly not as important. That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So it's like a lessening of that sense of self or self-importance. Yeah. Anyone else? Go on.
So around February last year, I consider it like one of the, events that sort of led me to here in the Buddhist Center. I was, after quite a significant period of depression and disillusionment of living in London and wondering what next. I visited a friend of mine in Pembrokeshire, southwest Wales, and it was only a few days, and it was the first day when I was there. And she was at work, so I had the whole day to myself. and the weather was terrible. It was pissing down. And I was just wandering around, and I found myself walking up a hill. I can see the sea, and I noticed that as I sat down on a bench and looked out to the sea, I could hear absolutely nothing.
Right.
And it was disarmingly beautiful.
Ah, okay.
Maybe it's because, well, living in London,
Yeah.
silence doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think in that moment I realised this is sort of the essence of where I want to move my life towards.
Right, okay. So you wanted to move towards that silence or that stillness, or?
Yeah, that more tranquility.
Right, okay.
Less
Yeah.
chaos.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks both of you for sharing that. Yeah. I suppose I'm interested really in those experiences of sort of beauty and that kind of thing. So I was thinking about, I was trying to think of this question for myself. So one of the qualities of samadhi is that we kind of open up, we experience beauty, we experience connectedness, and there's something in that, in both of what you were saying. And I was thinking about a time when I was on solitary retreat a few years ago. I think it was about 6 years ago. And I had this experience where I'd been meditating a lot, and after a particularly deep experience in meditation, I was staying in this hut in just a wooden cabin in Snowdonia. And I opened the door at the end of this meditation, and these 3 birds flew over, which sounds like nothing, does it? But it was so profound. It was like these 3 birds, it was like they were telling me something or teaching me something. It was such a perfect experience. It was like I never experienced a more perfect moment in my life, where like these birds flew over, and it was earth-shatteringly beautiful. And it was a bit like Sanghadharan was saying, nothing had changed outwardly. And I'm sure if I'd have seen these birds, like a couple of weeks before or something, I probably wouldn't even have noticed them. But there was something about the stillness in my mind that it became just incredibly beautiful, like utterly, utterly beautiful. And I think what this points to is, there's famous lines, aren't there, from the Dhammapada, which is a collection of sayings of the Buddha, which is experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. So I think the full verse is experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, produced by mind. So when we act with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. And basically what that means is you experience the world according to your mind. We don't experience the way the world actually is. But the more we experience the way the world actually is, then the more beautiful it is to us, the more radiant it is to us. And the thing about acting with a pure mind, well, that's acting on the basis of having practiced these paramitas. So practiced dana and sila, and practiced reflection in order to be able to see things actually more as they are. And then you get this experience of beauty. So to a Buddha, everything is absolutely beautiful. Everything is absolutely sublime. And to us, we can glimpse that sometimes, but that is more and more available to us the more we practice. And that's the quality of samadhi. Okay.
Sorry, that's everything is sublime?
Everything.
Even like period pains?
Possibly. Yeah. I don't know.
Right. I'm trying to get my head around that one.
Probably not. No. I mean, I think, like, say for example, a Buddha would experience physical pain, but their relationship to it would be different. So there wouldn't be any mental processes around that. There wouldn't be any kind of making it worse than it is. It would just be physical sensations. You'd be able to experience that and not kind of add anything on top of it. That's often the problem with our suffering, isn't it? Is it's not the thing itself that is the problem. It's what we add on top of it. So it's said, like at the end of his life, the Buddha was in quite a lot of physical pain, but he was still in extremely positive mental states. Okay, so just as a slight corrective, one thing I want to point out is that doesn't mean that everything will always be fine when you practice. And it also doesn't mean that if you aren't experiencing samadhi, or you're not experiencing expansive mental states, that you're not practicing properly. Because I think sometimes this is what we can think, is like, I've gone through this myself in periods like, I think, I've been practicing the Buddhist teaching for years and years, and I'm experiencing difficulty, and then we start to pile it on top of that, and we think, oh, we're somehow not doing it properly, or we're at fault, or something like that. That's actually not the case. And I think actually we go through stages, don't we? And often I think it's individual for each of us. There's a kind of there are different things that we bring into the world, and there are different life experiences that we have, and we need to work through those. And actually, as we do that, sometimes we might need to actually experience our difficulties more. We might need to open up to our difficulties. And opening up to difficulties is the way that we transform them. So it's not, what I'm not saying is that we always need to be in kind of rapturous, positive mental states to feel that we're practicing effectively. And I think our relationship to suffering is important. It's how we relate to it that's the key thing. And actually, if we can let our difficulties soften us, and we can actually open up and allow them to sort of, to soften us, and for us to sort of, in that, we can actually see that we're not the only ones suffering, then I think that also has an effect. Okay, so maybe I'll just pause there again and see if anyone's got any questions or comments or... Okay, so how do we cultivate samadhi? And I like the word cultivate, because I think cultivate to me implies something that it's not just something that you do, it's something that you tend to, and something that you pay attention to. So the obvious thing is meditation, and you're all doing that. But the reason why we encourage people to have a regular meditation practice is just meditating regularly. That will have an effect on the mind, basically, and it means we're able to be much more aware, which means that we don't then, we're able to see much more clearly when we're sort of adding on to that sense of self, or we're creating a story or a narrative that's unhelpful. And the more we're able to not do that, then the more these qualities start to arise, basically. And we can cultivate that sense of concentration or one-pointedness in concentration practices like the mindfulness of breathing. We can practice open-heartedness in the metta bhavana, and then as we do that, we can, with a mind that is more pliable and more expansive, we can start to see how things really are, and we can reflect on how things are. We can reflect on our own experience, and that's when prajna and wisdom starts to arise. Okay. And another way we can do that is practicing dana and sila, just practicing generosity, basically, and trying to bring in some element of simplicity into our life. So we were talking about this course, Digital Dharma, we're talking about going on retreats. Some element of simplicity is really, really important. Like what goes against this, and what is really stands in the way of this, is when there's basically too much input and our mind just doesn't have space to breathe, basically. Also as well, I think experiencing beauty and experiencing that through kind of art or music, that can have a kind of a softening and a sort of an expansive effect on the mind, which leads to these states arising as well. Okay, so I'm going to start to wrap up in a minute. Just one other point I wanted to make, which is just going back to this thing about experiencing beauty and our basically our mind. It's not. Hang on. How can I put this? The experience that we have basically being to do with our mind and not necessarily what's kind of out there, so to speak. So another aspect of this is that we live in a time which is unique in, like, say, for example, in the history of Buddhism. Like, everything is available to us all the time now. Like in ancient times, so the person that always comes to mind for me is a Japanese teacher called Kukai. So he was the founder of a school in Japan called, like a Buddhist school, a Buddhist tradition in Japan called Shingon. And he literally risked his life to get the Buddha's teachings. So he went to China several times on these, and people died regularly doing that voyage. Like the journey by ship from Japan to China was very, very, very treacherous, and people often died doing that. And he did that several times to bring back teachings from China to Japan. People used to go and see their master, and they would bring them gold, and they would offer their life in devotion to their teacher to get a scrap of the Buddha's teaching, whereas we completely take it for granted because everything's available all the time, and you just need to go online and you can Google whatever teaching you want and it's there. You can read it, the paramitas, the Noble Eightfold Path, the Mahayana Sutras, whatever it is. And the thing is, what that means is we think that all we need to do is read the right teaching, and that is what is going to change us, basically. That's what's going to have an effect on us. But that's us approaching it with our ordinary everyday mind, because that's what we normally think, is we've got this attitude of getting and appropriating all the time. And we think that if we just read the right thing or we get the right teaching, that it will have an effect on us. But it's actually not like that. When our minds are sufficiently, when we're receptive enough, or when our minds are, like fertile soil, when we've changed ourselves enough on the basis of doing this, then anything becomes a teaching. So it's a little bit like that experience that I was talking about when I was on retreat. I felt like those birds were teaching me something about the nature of reality, about impermanence. And that's because my mind was open enough that I could actually see it. When our minds are open enough, anything becomes a teaching. We don't actually need, when the mind is open, so open, you wouldn't even actually need a teaching. But what you find is that the teachings will speak to you more and more and more, the more you have this quality. We tend to think it's the other way around. I remember when I first got involved here, I just read so many books all the time, just thinking, the next one, the next one, the next one. That's where I'm going to find that magic sentence that's going to unlock everything for me. And actually, it doesn't work like that. What you need to do is change yourself. And when you change yourself, then the teachings will speak to you more. That's what we need to do. And even then, when we talk about this quality of samadhi, it's not about having an experience. Often we're kind of looking for an experience. It's not an experience that you get. It's a quality that arises when you change your life and when you change your mind. Okay. Yeah, so that's a little bit about samadhi. And just to finish, I'm going to go back to the start and talk about the quality of the Bodhisattva, which is the really important thing is that when you start to conceive of this, all of this, in such a way that goes beyond the personal, that's when things start to really have an effect. And we can practice that at any level. So just practicing ethics, practicing generosity, you start to go beyond yourself, and you start to just lessen this sense of self, and you start to reach out to others, which gives more of a sense of connection. And then the more you practice on that basis, where you're actually concerned for others, and you can see, well, maybe I'll put it the other way around, actually. It's not about what you see, it's about the way that you don't see, which is less of this self-referential kind of, there's an I here and nothing else matters. That's when this really starts to arise, and when that's when it really makes a difference. Okay, so maybe I'll leave it there for this evening. And next week, Kuslasara will be talking about wisdom, about prajna. So to see how this all relates to wisdom, come back next week for Kuslasara's talk. Okay, so have a good journey home, and wishing you all a good week.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you'd like to put your mats and cushions away at the end, that'd be really helpful.